And welcome to this ALD seminar about the future of lighting design. My name is Scott Palmer. I'm a member of staff at the University of Leeds in the School of Performance and Cultural Industries, and I'm chairing this session today. This seminar attempts to look forward for the next 50 years of lighting design. You may well be aware that the Association of Lighting Designers is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, so we are kind of looking back and also, more particularly in the seminar, looking forward to investigate the role of the lighting designer and what the next 50 years might hold. And the questions that we are posing, we hope to be investigating, are what should we be doing differently in the next 50 years? Is there a great innovator or a modern Appia around at the moment? How should lighting designers influence the development of the tools that they work with? And whether the role of the lighting designer itself is a passing fad. Are we destined to be all to become video designers? So it's quite a wide-ranging remit. I'm going to introduce the panel now. So at the end, we have Colin Grenfell. Colin has designed lighting for a very wide range of productions, including the critically acclaimed Black Watch for National Theatre Scotland. He's worked with Phelan McDermott, the production of The Hanging Man, which began here in Leeds, and he's worked with companies such as Shared Experience and Frantic Assembly. And he's recently lit a production one of my colleagues designed, Steel Magnolias in Dundee, and The Caretaker with Jonathan Price, which is touring internationally. And he's currently working on 3 operas for Holland Park, which will be happening this summer. Moving this way, I can introduce Kelli Zezulka. Kelli is one of the Association of Lighting Designers meeting representatives, and she's put together this panel today, so thank you very much for that. Kelli trained at LAMDA, and since graduating she's worked for the Royal Court Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company and West Yorkshire Playhouse in the lighting departments, and as a freelance lighting designer in small to mid-scale theatre and opera. She's recently completed an MA by Research at the University of Leeds, which focused on the history of lighting design at the Royal Court Theatre, and she's hoping to commence her PhD studies at Leeds this summer. In the middle, we have Theo Chadha. And Theo is a final year undergraduate student at the University of Leeds. He's studying performance design, PI honours. During his studies, he's become particularly fascinated by the role of light in performance and has taken many opportunities to develop his skills as an emergent lighting designer. He's worked at a number of venues around the UK as designer, assistant designer and technician in drama, musicals, opera, immersive performance and lighting for museum installations. He's lit Leeds Youth Opera's production of La Traviata in collaboration with Opera North at the Carriage Works and is regularly employed at Chichester Festival Theatre. And after completing his finals, he's going to be taking a production of Inheritance Blues to the International Student Drama Festival in Sheffield and later to Edinburgh. And Theo's here because the ALD would like a student voice on this panel. And last but not least, on my left, Richard Owen. Richard's worked in lighting since the late 1980s. He joined West Yorkshire Playhouse when it first opened in 1990 and has since worked both as deputy and a chief electrician at Sheffield Crucible and Lyceum Theatres. 10 years ago, he moved back across the Pennines to Manchester to take up the role of head of lighting at the Royal Exchange, where he's lit over 25 productions, including Little Voice, Flags, Zack and Salt. And on cue, hot foot from the station. Hi.
Yeah, the wrong station.
Come and have a seat.
Cheers, thank you.
And finally, to introduce Guy Hoare. Guy, who's been designing lighting for theatre, dance, opera, musicals for over 15 years. He was recently nominated for 2 national awards in lighting, for Best Lighting Designer for A Christmas Carol at the 2010 TMA Awards, and Best Lighting in Opera for The Magic Flute at the 2009 Night of Illumination Awards. Guy has extensive experience in dance lighting, was the lighting designer for Henry Ogiki Dance Company for 6 years, during which time he designed over 20 new works. His current projects for 2011 include After Effects and a production for Sydney dance company, The Land of Yes, The Land of No. Recent credits also include Peter Pan for the National Theatre of Scotland, Serenading Louis for Donmar Warehouse, Waste for the Almeida, the Henry Othello, which again started at West Yorkshire Playhouse, Basildon at the Royal Court, and A Doll's House at the Young Vic. Welcome to you all. So I'm planning to ask the panel to say a few things in response to some of those questions that I posited at the beginning of this session. Looking for a visionary, to a modern visionary to match Appia is a fairly tall order. Some of you in the audience may not be too familiar with Appia, so I'm just going to say briefly a little bit about who he was. Adolphe Appiah was, for many, seen as the father of modern lighting design. So he was a Swiss practitioner working at the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. And he was fascinated. He was actually musically trained and fascinated by the works of Wagner. And Wagner, as you may know, had this concept of the Gesamtkunstwerk, the all-embracing artwork. And Appia was inspired by listening to the operas. And when he went to see them at Wagner's theatre in Bayreuth, he was appalled at the staging conditions he found there. Particularly in terms of the way in which the lighting and the staging worked together or didn't work together. And based on that, Appia developed a series of scenarios where he envisaged light taking an active role in the production, not just simply as illumination. And his ideas, not just in theory, he did a lot of practice. He worked with people like Hugo Behr at the Dresden Opera House and in Vienna, and saw the new technology at the time, the electric carbon arc, being used to create sharp, direct lighting. And that led to Appiah's idea of notions of active light that could create shadow and be an expressive force, as opposed to light that was general and just illuminated the stage and threw shadows onto painted scenery. So Appia, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, was looking to move stage lighting practice onto a new level, using light as an expressive force, thinking about the stage environment and creating environment through an atmospheric environment through and with light, rather than as an illustrative medium to replicate the world around us. So not simply using the scenery and lighting to replicate a forest, but to give the atmosphere of a man in a forest, is one of his famous quotations. And Appia was also, at the turn of the 20th century, was looking at the potential role of projection, which he saw would be the future of theatre lighting, and that's really appropriate for this particular session. I suspect some of our discussions might be about the role of the lighting designer and the role of projection in performance. And Appia was someone who saw that this new bright light source, the arc light, and its ability to throw shadows and to throw textures into the scenic space would be the future for lighting design. And that's one of his three types of lighting design: was active light, which is the direct light that created shadow; diffuse light, which is the general, what we might call a general cover, a general illumination of the stage; and projected light, light that might give a textured feel to the scene. So that's a little bit of background, and that sets the context for this session. And now I'm going to ask our panellists to respond to that and respond to those questions that we've already identified. So, Colin, would you like to say a few things? So once we've had these provocations, we're going to throw the session open to the floor for your questions, and we'll respond to those. Colin.
Well, it's interesting. I think where Appia starts in history is just at the rise of naturalism, and then followed sort of closely on by realism. And in some ways, I think we've been somewhat stuck in those modes, particularly with the rise of television and film, which have sort of enforced this as the method of presenting narrative theatre. And I'd like to see us move away from just presenting a naturalistic look to lighting and how that's used, and to again move back more to what he was going for, which was an expressive form. It's a starting point.
Thank you. Guy?
Without wishing to sound, I sort of disagree. And for me, where Appia hit the nail on the head was in the importance of darkness. For me, pretty much all the lighting I do, whether it's a naturalistic piece or whether it's an abstract piece, and and I love doing both, it's all deeply rooted in a light source and a light quality that I can relate to and I can anchor it to in the real world. My palette tends to keep to colours that we see in light in the real world, and textures that are believable or evocative of something that we can encounter in the real world. I don't think that means I do naturalism or realism all the time, but everything is very much rooted in that. But for me, the most important thing is darkness. And my concern about the next 50 years is that we're losing that. Theatres are getting brighter and brighter. The exit lights are getting brighter and brighter. It is impossible to get a blackout. And if we're trying to be efficient with lights and we want to keep things as dim as possible on stage, which I certainly do, then we need to switch all the other lights off first. And that is my biggest bugbear. And I don't see it getting any better over the next 50 years. I see it getting worse.
Thank you, it's very helpful. Kelli?
I think just one more thing that I think about Appia is in one of the ways that he was quite revolutionary was he said that the lighting design for a production was already imminent in the score. So he was working primarily with Wagner, but that it's already there. You just need to find it, basically. And I think it's a really, really important idea of Appiah's, and not something that everybody else was doing at the time. I just want to also just say I was watching, I don't know if anybody else saw this, the Shakespeare's Globe program on Sky Arts 2 the other night. There was a rather irate woman who was going on about how lighting designers basically inhibit performance, and that's one of the reasons why the Globe is so successful is because they don't have lighting designers.
She's a fan.
She was saying that defining the space with light is inhibiting to an actor, and therefore the flow of the production. And it also prohibits the audience from looking wherever they want to on stage. It tells you exactly where to look. And there's a quote from Lynn Gardner, who wrote an article in Focus a couple years ago. And she said, lighting is relied upon to signpost us along the way in the journey of a play and to tell us what to think and feel. And I just wonder if that's the direction we should be going in, or if this woman at the Globe is actually right.
So there's something then. Lighting designers inhibiting performance on one hand, or are they essential to give signposts? That sounds like a very intelligent critic to me. So Lynn Gardner, the lighting designer to signpost for the audience. Thank you. Theo, would you like to say something from a student perspective?
Well, Appia was responding in a large way to the great shift in technology from gas to electric, and how, as they put it, the glare of electric light highlighted the flaws of their current staging techniques. So possibly the next visionary or the next Appia, as is posed in the question, would be someone responding to the new shifts that we're seeing in technology now, like the moving towards pixel mapping and LED technologies, and how that can be used away from how we see it more on sort of shows like the X Factor for effects, to a more artistic use of that technology.
So something there about Appia making the most of the current and new technologies of the time, and perhaps we're on the cusp of a new time where technologies might also impact on the future role of the lighting designer. Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. I suppose mine is similar to Kelly's. I've speaking to a number of lighting designers who've been into my theatre recently, and they've been talking about the fact that they seem to be moving away from using lighting to locate the play, and more into dealing with the emotions of the play, that sound and video are moving into that area of location, that it's easier to create the feel that you're in a forest through sound than it is through lighting. So I think we need to be looking at where we take lighting design in terms of signposting the play, looking at the emotions of the play and taking the emotional journey through lighting rather than the storyboard of a play through the lighting design and the location of it. And I think that's where lighting design needs to be looking for the next generation.
So something there about the role of light that goes beyond the simple recreation of an environment on the stage. And those couple of comments there just remind me of the kind of the trotted out phrase about that good lighting is something that shouldn't be seen in performance, which really annoys me. That good lighting should not be noticed. There's something to think about potentially for the question session. Should good lighting be noticed or not? So we've looked a little bit there about Appia, which comes on to the second point we have, a question we are tasked with answering today, and that is how should lighting designers influence the development of the tools that they work with? And perhaps again we'll start with Colin.
I work predominantly in theatre, and quite often we're sort of the poor relation, quite financially literally so, when it comes to moving heads and the new toys. And generally we're the last people to get our hands on them, simply because budgets don't allow us to play with the latest and the greatest stuff. And quite often, we're all very used to using some pretty old kit, whether it's a sort of a PAT 743. But even moving lights, I think most of us still regularly use sort of VL1000s, very relatively old theatre kit, and it would be lovely to be more involved with the newer technologies and go, well, actually, this is what we want out of moving light, rather than trying to get sort of rock and roll's hand-me-downs and trying to sort of fit those into what we want out of a moving light.
Thank you.
I think largely I'd agree with that. I'm actually still very, very happy using really old basic kit. You give me a Parkan, I can light a show with it very happily. The fewer things to go wrong with a light always excites me. I have a real problem with discharge sources. To say I hate them with a passion is too strong, but it annoys me that you never get a rig where they're all the same. It annoys me in a culture where we're trying to be efficient that to get the quality of light you want, you have to stick a piece of metal 90% of the way into the beam and then put a load of bits of coloured glass in the way just to try and get it to look like, that dim guttering candle that you're after. It's great for certain things. Those certain things are so rarely part of my design that I think the last time I used any moving lights was on Peter Pan. Any discharge moving lights. I'm interested to see whether LED really does come on board as a viable alternative. Everything I've seen of it so far, it's great for big poppy colours, it's great for really bright saturated things. It's not great for reproducing what we got with a pattern 23 years ago. The day that either an LED source or an efficient source can produce the beam quality of a Parkan and the dimming of a Parkan is the day when I'll actually go, no, we really can embrace this. But it has its place at the moment, but I still can't see myself building a show around it. It's just not subtle and delicate enough yet.
So something there about the role of the lighting designer in influencing potential new light sources and the quality of those light sources for creative means. I think it's really important. Thank you. Kelli?
I think the key thing in developing new technology and using it is that it still has to be seen as a tool. A 50-watt light bulb is a tool in the same way that a VL 3500 is a tool. And I think if you don't use it properly. I think moving lights particularly are quite easy to just cut and paste and bung them all on a plan, and I'll deal with that bit later. Whereas if you've got a generic rig and you have to put each light on the page and you really have to think about what it's going to do, it's got one use, and you really have to consider that light. I think the work has moved from the pre-production stage to that bit in the tech week when you've got to work out your moving light positions and everything. So yeah, I think as long as it's used properly, but recognizing that it's still a tool to be used.
Thank you. Theo.
Well, most of what I'm working with at the level I'm at the moment tends to be generic fixtures. I mean, our rig at Stage at Leeds has in the house rig a few Discharge spotlights and some TW1s, which are immensely useful, but I tend to use them mostly as almost like if there's a position that we can't rig properly in, or just to if I haven't quite thought it through, or if I've run out of generic fixtures, having a spotlight there just as almost a get out of jail free card is very useful. And it's the way I've seen them used a few times in other aspects. But it would be nice in terms of other technologies to be for, as was said earlier, rather than having hand-me-downs, having actual things that are designed specifically for theatrical purposes, and colour mixing that can achieve the more subtle tints in the Lee and Roscoe books. But yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you. Richard.
I think I come into this with slightly two hats on as a chief electrician in a regional theatre. From my point of view, I need lighting designers to be pushing technology and pushing the new technology, because it's not coming through into the theatres until we see lighting designers specifying it and wanting it on a regular basis. And with certainly in regional theatres, the turnaround times are becoming shorter. We're trying to push more shows and more events, more use of the space to create more money for to deal with the cuts that we've all had to deal with, and therefore we need to be using that. And I'm very fortunate my theatre has a lot of stock and a lot of nice generic stock, but we aren't seeing those new pieces of technology coming through until we start to get lighting designers specifying it on shows and wanting it. And therefore I think the discussions need to take place between manufacturers and lighting designers rather than manufacturers and lighting technicians as to where technology moves forward, so that lighting designers are more involved in the development of that technology, and then they can then want to use that technology in theatres.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the final question, which I'm going to put together now. So looking at the role of the stage lighting designer, and linking that with the role of video projection in performance. So the question that was posed was, is the role of the staging lighting designer a passing fad? Would you like to say something about experiences you've had then about the role of, in your role as lighting designer, in productions where perhaps projection has been used, sometimes perhaps in competition with the lighting? Tell us a bit about your experiences, Colin.
I think, like so much in the theatre, things go in and out of fashion. I think probably about 2 years ago, 90% of the shows that I lit that year all involved a video element. And then the year after that, it was probably 60%. So it's really used an incredibly, maybe it's the sort of shows that I work on, but it's surprising just how much it is being used. And I wonder whether it is a fashion thing. I also notice it's quite telling that the Olivier Awards, the set design award, is sponsored by XL Video. Nothing against XL Video. It just seems that there's a move towards video is going to solve all our scenography problems, either through lighting and either stage design or video, and I think it's something to be sort of cautious of. I think when it's used well, it can be absolutely fantastic and it's a joy to work with. But when it becomes a bolt-on, just because it's the fashionable thing to do, and it's so easy to be seduced by the bright moving pictures that video could use, that you have to sort of hold back and go, what is this actually giving to the piece? And I think just a little bit more examination of that. And I'd like to see it being used more as a expressive tool rather than just going, here we are in the forest. That's my feeling about it.
Yes, it just reminds me of Appia, who was railing against two-dimensional painted scenery, and we often in danger of replacing that with two-dimensional projected scenery.
That's absolutely my position on this. I've worked on some shows where the video has been absolutely amazing and integral to the show, and I've worked on it where it's basically given us a 2D moving backdrop, and that for me is lazy design and lazy scenography, and frankly we got rid of painted backdrops a long time ago because we realised that 3 dimensions were more interesting. I still work on countless shows where there's a video projector and it's out front or it's on bar 1 and it's covering the back wall, and I couldn't be more bored by work like that. But when the projector is being used as a light source to do something with light that you cannot do in any other way, then it's fantastic. I recently did a show for Sound and Fury where a man is in a dark room and you see him develop a photo in his hands, and that's because there's a video projector concealed in a table coming up through the developing tray, and that's magic in theatre delivered by a video projector. I've done dance shows where we actually use the video projector just as sidelight, and it gives us textures and sharper lines than you'd ever achieve with the most optically perfect Source 4. You've got constant mutating colours and morphing of sharp focus to soft focus, things that we can't really do with any other tools. That's a place for video. I just revived an opera where, when we did it first time round, we had custom gobos and KK wheels to give some weird, mushy kind of snow effect on a mirror. And doing it with video, we got exactly what we wanted, which was falling paper, and as the camera pans back, the sheets of paper get smaller and smaller so they appear to be snow. And that was the kind of delicate, poetic quality that we wanted, and video can do that, and lighting can't. But when it just becomes 2D backdrops that can move, that bores me to tears.
So, Guy, can I just ask, was that just that effect you just described, well, those two, the Sound of Fury image, which I've heard a lot of people talk about actually, so it really did make a significant impact on the experience of seeing that production. And your falling snow, were those both things that you as a lighting designer created?
No, I worked, both of them were Dick
replacing
Straker.
a lighting effect, obviously.
Both of them were with Dick Straker from Mesmer. The first one, the Going Dark piece, we'd done some R&D 18 months before. We'd worked out roughly what scenes we wanted to tell. Originally, the piece was potentially going to be completely in pitch black, and after the R&D, we realised there were certain things we wanted to see. So we knew that there was going to be a video artist on board from day one, and Dick and I worked very closely together and worked out, okay, this scene will be lit by light, this scene will be lit by video projection, because as far as I'm concerned, the video projector is a light source, and it's a valid light source in the space. With the snow effect on Onegin, it was an image that the designer and I had originally. I'd tried to produce it in 2007 with, frankly, kit that didn't really deliver the job, and more importantly was an absolute pain to tour. So I got Dick back in and I said, Dick, this is the brief. We want it to be paper that morphs into snow. It's for this one scene, and we spoke about it, but I knew that he was absolutely the right person to do. I'd worked with him on several shows, and it's a collaboration. I think when it's a collaboration, it works. When he's got his ideas and you've got your ideas and you're not on the same page, that's when it's going to be a disaster.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think I think the video designer has got to be on board from the very beginning, and it's got to be a collaborative process, and there's got to be a lot of dialogue about it. Otherwise, it does just become a bolt-on, and in which case you might as well do without it, I think. But I think the question about whether we're all destined to become video designers, I think probably not, because I think they're both such specialized areas to work in. And the role of the lighting designer developed originally because the equipment and the operation of it became too technical. Directors used to do their own lighting, and when you had a rig of 16 Pat 23s or whatever, there's not really much to it, is there? So directors could kind of take that over. And when the technology and the equipment started to get too complicated, that's when the role of the lighting designer was born. And I think in the same way with video design, that equipment is specialized in its own right. So I don't think that there will be a merge between the two, because they're both quite specialized.
Thank you.
In terms of its use in the theatre, I think it needs to be a very careful, considered integration into the mise-en-scene from the beginning. It needs to be part of a dialogue between the set designer, lighting designer, and video designer from the very beginning. Otherwise, it will, as said, will seem like a bolt-on. I remember seeing a show a few years ago at the Chichester Festival Theatre called Changing Tables by Terence Rattigan, where they'd installed a large projection bar above the space to give the impression of the seaside, and it was a constantly changing image. But I was sat there in my seat, aware that the acting, beautifully lit acting, was going on down there, but my eyes were straight up at this projection because it was constantly moving and changing. And I saw it was a great distraction, and it seemed like it hadn't been very well thought through. And it seemed to me as part of the season that show had taken place in, where they'd had Headlong in before, who managed to integrate it brilliantly. It definitely seemed like a bolt-on, having this video design. So I think it comes down to the eye is attracted to movement, and it's attracted to change in intensities and things. So not integrating it properly will, one, destroy the video design and destroy the lighting design in terms of the audience being distracted by one or the other.
Thank you.
I think everyone seems to be saying the same thing.
You've got the tough job, Richard, at the end, haven't you?
I do think that we shouldn't be scared of getting involved in video. I think that as lighting designers, we can influence how the video works and actually be involved in lighting any sections of film that we need to find, and the content, and working that into the right colour palette and the right feelings for the show. It is about collaboration, and I think that's the major thing. We probably about 18 months ago did a show at the Royal Exchange, which is not the easiest place to put video projection into at all, where we projected onto the floor of the stage, and the lighting designer at that time had a real struggle in being able to light the scenes with the video projection taking place, and also the colour palette that he was using as opposed to the colour palette that the video designer was using just didn't work. It really grated together, and that was because the video designer wasn't on board in early enough, and what we should have been doing was generating all of our own content and filming it and lighting it in the right way. And I think that's where lighting design really needs to get involved with the video designer, so that it's a meshed thing together. And we certainly seem to be getting to the point now where the control of video is likely to come through lighting desks in the future rather than sound desks, which is how it's been in the past, or an additional QLab or whatever. And I think we need to, as lighting designers, we need to be aware of how that's going to work, how that fits into our cue stacks and our programming of the show. So while I don't think lighting designers will ever become video designers, I think there needs to be a merging of the two.
So something there then about the crucial nature of the collaborative process, that when we're using video material with the other aspects of the scenography of performance. And something also there about the way in which perhaps lighting practitioners need to be educated, and ways in which the equipment might need to be controlled.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're certainly, with the newer generations of a lighting desk, the control of video becomes a lot easier. And and with certain moving head projectors and that kind of thing, I think we'll be seeing that more coming into theatres in the future. So I think that we need to be aware of how that all fits together. It's now less of a video designer sat at the back of the stalls with their laptop and hard drives and making all that work. We can actually integrate it into the whole lighting design. I think that's a good way of working.
So thank you. So what I'm hearing is it's too early to announce the death of the lighting designer. We've got 20 minutes left of the session. What I'd like to do now is to open this discussion to the floor. So you've heard a number of comments and issues that you might want to come back to or to question. We have a roving Ian who's got a roving microphone. Thank you.
My name's Alvin Ady. I have no qualifications in lighting design other than experience. I was thrown into lighting about 20 years ago. Here's the lights, sort of. I think you're all getting a bit scary. No, I think, how am I going to put it this way without putting you down? Lighting and video and sound should be dealt with holistically. I've used video, well, not actually video, picture projection, not moving stuff. Moving stuff is, our friend here said, it's very off-putting. I've used skylines. Bradford skyline in the day, Bradford skyline in the dark, Bradford skyline in snow, for a play we did called Homeless.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just going to come to that. Why are we saying that the video and the lighting designer and the sound have to be separate? Why do they have to be separate? If people are using the old equipment and not the moving heads, why do they have to be separate? Because the lighting designer can design a video and get somebody to do it for him.
Yeah, I didn't hear that anybody was saying they need to be separate, but perhaps somebody would like to come back on that?
Certainly, I'd say that they don't have to be separate. Some people combine the jobs of more than one very successfully. Personally, I know I work much better in a team. Sometimes when I do dance, I'm working almost in a bubble with the choreographer, and sometimes I have designers to bounce other ideas off. I love working with composers and with sound designers, and for me, something I do may trigger an idea for them, and something they do is clearly going to influence and spark off ideas with me. So it's not that I think that we all need to hold on to our own little areas of power. I think it's more that if you have more creative minds in a team who are really on the same page, I think you get a more interesting and more exciting show. I think it pushes you into new territory.
I totally agree with the fact that lighting is getting too bright.
Thank you. Is there a question? Two-thirds of the way back, Ian. Yes, what I heard was actually an ambition for light rather than and as part of a holistic process, a holistic creative process, rather than anything that was. I didn't hear anybody advocate that it should be in any way separate. I guess we're just trying to concentrate on the notions of light in this particular seminar. Yes, the question. Thank you.
Hi. So we're in a world at the moment where light sources aren't really designed for us. So the LED development is primarily driven by horticulture, where they influence the taste of our strawberries by the colour of the light they give it. So sadly, I don't think we're ever going to be a big enough industry to sort of define the light sources we get. But they're all tools in a box. And Guy touched on earlier, if I want to use a pattern 23, I'll use it. And then said if LED products ever become the same as a par can, then I'll use them then. I don't think they ever will. They're very different. But I wonder if it's slightly that the technology is a distraction from people actually valuing the quality of design, which in its own right seems to be sort of lost sometimes. People get very excited by the technology. Do you guys feel that the sort of design itself is being devalued.
Sometimes I think we're in danger of sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to new toys, and old techniques can be fantastic. I think a case in point would be just on the caretaker. I've just got a skylight, and I had 4 KK wheels doing a rain effect, and since touring in the States, it's proved incredibly hard to get KK wheels. Just I think Roscoe aren't really making them anymore out there, and the sheer expense we've had to go to create interference in front of a gobo in a profile unit has just been mind-numbing, just mind-boggling, just the lengths we've had to go to replace a very, very simple technology. And we've been going through sort of GAM film effects and stuff like that. And I go, well, can we not just go back to the old ways? Because sometimes they can be just as good, if not more effective. So, yeah, I completely agree about just not getting wowed by the technology. And
let's be clear as well, we're not down on technology. You know, the incandescent light bulb is technology, and we all applaud it and love it. I mean, the humble match and the candle are technology. They're just old forms. I'm totally up for really taking any product out there that makes light and going, is this useful for me? How can I use this? I just put 12 compact fluorescent spiral twisty ugly light bulbs on a show because I really loved the ugliness of it, and I loved the quality of light that they give off. You know, I don't like it in my home, I don't like it in my hallway or in my bedroom, but it was absolutely perfect for that show. So I think it's about going, what can this tool do? Is that useful for me? And there are shows where LEDs will be useful for me. At the moment, they aren't useful as a replacement for what, you know, I've generally been using as my, you know, the bedrock of my design work.
Can I ask a sort of supplementary question there then? Because I'm thinking about, there are practitioners, I'm thinking of someone like Josef Svoboda, the Czech scenographer, who had time to play and to experiment and to create new light sources just through having an idea, a creative idea, and then working out how can we create this on stage. But he had time and space to do that. Do any of you have that same kind of time and space to mess around with technology, old or new? And do you think it's important?
It's great. I mean, it depends on the company. Sometimes when you can be with a company from start to finish for a whole project, you can play around in the rehearsal room, and that's just fantastic when that happens. But as budgets get squeezed tighter and tighter and you have to pack more and more shows in, it becomes harder to financially make that viable and earn a living. It's a great shame. Because, yeah, I mean, my favourite shows are the ones where you've been in the rehearsal room for every minute of the rehearsals, but they become fewer and fewer just because people can't afford to pay you for that length of engagement.
I think it is difficult. I think for freelance lighting designers, you're going from show to show, and you can't spend the time in rehearsals that you would want to. I think possibly there is a need to use a team and to use and collaborate with in-house staff and see if there's a way of developing through more ideas through that. Sometimes that's very easy, sometimes it's not, and I think we have to realise that the creative process is not just one person. It's everybody within that lighting team. It's the programmer, it's the chief electrician, it's the assistant electrician who's focusing above them, it's whoever's cutting the colour, it's whoever's making the practicals for the show. Everybody has a role, and I think that that's where we can find the time to develop different ideas and also bring that knowledge in.
The other thing that strikes me is that theatre has always borrowed technologies from other. Just thinking about your comment there about the LED technology, theatre's always used what's available, what's out there. Parkans coming from aircraft and so on. So so I think in the theatre we've always, because of budgets, we've always had to be creative with the technologies that are available. Another question from the floor.
Hi guys, I just want to ask, how do you see audience expectations changing? Because there seems to be quite a common trend at the moment, like big West End shows. It's more about like a lot of them made up from rock and roll. It's almost as if everything's becoming a rock and roll show. You've got the $1 Million Quartet and various of the Jersey Boys, and they're all quite glitzy. You've got the X Factor, shows like that. Everything's quite in your face, quite glitzy. Do you think the audience are almost expecting to see that on every show? Or do you think there will always be that sort of aesthetic to the lighting design in the next 50 years?
Well, I think there's been modern audiences are more sensitive to the visual aspects of performance that perhaps they weren't 10, 20 years ago. Whether that's to do with what's sometimes known as the MTV generation, or not, I don't know, or just a more awareness of the impact of visual over the word. Anyone would like to comment?
I certainly find a little bit of that with when I do musicals, which isn't very often. You'll kind of reach a point where somebody at some point goes, can't we make it a bit more X Factor? And I think the reality is every show on telly, even kind of relatively small budget shows on telly, have so many moving lights, vastly more than I've ever had on any, even the biggest budget show that I've ever had. And it becomes quite depressing to go, well, A, no, we can't really do X Factor, and B, do we really have to? As I said before, I generally quite like a fairly muted colour palette. Now, obviously, there are times when you do just have to throw a bit more colour at the wall. But there are times when it really depresses me when somebody goes, can't we just put a bit more saturated colouring because suddenly that will make it more interesting? I think if my images don't work in black and white, then I've kind of failed. I think suddenly making them pink isn't gonna transform a scene that isn't working into a scene that is. So, yes, I will accept that if you look at my back catalogue, my musicals are probably more colourful than a lot of my other work. But I get slightly frustrated by the way expectations have changed on certain shows. I think it's only on certain shows. The flip side is I think a lot of cinematography has certainly influenced a lot of my work in theatre and film, always has done. And I think a lot of theatre techniques have come from film and vice versa, and I think I would kind of welcome that and encourage that.
I think probably as long as it's integrated into what you're doing, as long as it's not an effect, as long as it's not something that's laid over the top. I think that's where you get into kind of dodgy territory.
There's something there about our innate response to light, isn't there? The kind of spectacular moment that light can create that sometimes can be seen as an artistic shortcut, but that makers of performance perhaps like to use as to create those moments that people will take away with them from seeing the performance. And obviously light is often central to those moments. But on the other hand, you've already had a really good example today. I'm thinking about your developing photograph there, where you've got light creating a wonderful moment that's not innately spectacular, but it is something that the audience take away as a kind of key moment of that performance. Thank you. Another question.
Hi, first of all, I completely agree with you about stage or auditoriums getting too bright. I mean, first we have to contend with the spill from exit lights in the wings, and now auditorium house lights seem to go to about 20% and stay there. So our main question I had is, you feel with new technology and obviously LED and the proliferation of moving lights that's appearing in theatres, more so borrowed from the sort of rock and roll days, do you feel that there's a trend towards lazy design? I'm not saying yourselves, but whereas previously you'd sit and go through a swatch book and you'd pick out your colour palette in advance and you'd draw a plot, you'd know where every fixture is and what it's doing, and you'd consider your gobos, and now it's we've got all these LEDs, so we'll have this colour and the director's not too keen on that, we'll just change it, and it's sort of become more sloppy. The gobos are what's available, and so I've seen this in smaller scale productions. I've sort of seen this as a trend rather than carefully thinking about the design. It's, well, we've got all this LED, so the colour palette doesn't matter, the gels don't matter, we'll just use what we feel like at the time. Have you seen that, or is it? Do you feel it's going that way?
I've seen it.
It's horrible, isn't it?
We've all seen it.
I'm in a slightly difficult position because I work in a glass-sided theatre under 3 glass domes. So ambient daylight is a constant problem for me. I
was thinking about theatres that can do something about it.
But I still think that most lighting designers are spending a lot of time thinking about their colour palette and making sure that they've got the right thing, that even with CMY mixing and moving lights, it's not just a case of, oh well, I'll deal with the colour when it arrives. We've just put in a show where we're using 14 LED colour mixing LED units to light a very big canopy, and I know that the lighting designer, which is Joe Town, spent a long time working out how the journey of that piece of set was going to work and how to get from each colour through the colour mixing, because we've still not worked out how you go from blue to orange without going through pink. And this piece of set is constantly lit; it never goes out. So I think that we're still doing that. There are various bits of lazy lighting design. We've all seen it, but I think that's what we need to be looking at the moment, is using that technology, but also making sure that we've done our research, we've done our homework, and that we know exactly where it's going to go. Especially as tech times are being cut down, you don't have the time to play around in a theatre, whether it's light or dark. In the technical rehearsal, most technical rehearsals are now being taken up, I find, with the director reblocking the show that they've rehearsed for the last 4 weeks. So that seems to be, I think that we still need to be doing that, and I hope that lighting designers continue to do that.
I think for me it's a couple of things. Partly I'm frustrated that for me in a moving light it's the wrong bit that moves. For me, where the light is coming from is the most important thing in any stage picture. So to actually have a light that could move around the stage rather than be in one place but point to different places, that would be a great tool. Inevitably on a big touring show, particularly musicals, where the set design has given you 4 bars, if you're lucky, to light from, and the producer wants it in and up ready to be on that night, you have to go down the route of more moving lights, because it's a lot faster to put in, and it's a lot faster to get the show looking right by Monday night. And that's a given which I reluctantly accepted after trying and fighting on the first touring musical I did to do it differently. Moving lights do have their job, but for me, there are only so many you can put in a rig, because of budget, and it still isn't going to replace that scene where you want the light to be coming from down over there. It's an extra top up on top of stuff, and it's, for me, they're really wonderful for having one source that can just very slowly shift in its colour, or one source that can very slowly corkscrew in on somebody during a scene. But it's hard for me to light an entire show where that's the bulk of the rig.
Thank you. Ian's question about you.
Yeah, hi there. On the subject of the death of a lighting designer, have you found an experience where, as the director and the designers get more savvy to lighting design, that you're starting to find the role of a lighting designer being diluted in the production team? It was interesting, actually. Theo was the only person that mentioned the production team all in this whole session, and it hasn't really come up. I just thought, do we need to protect our role as lighting designer with the production team?
Do we need to protect the role of the lighting designer?
I don't feel particularly under threat, and actually my favourite designers that I work with are the ones who are most savvy about lighting, because they tend to design
things that you can light.
Sets you go, oh my goodness, there's so much I can do with this. There's always that moment with a sort of first looking at a white card model where you have a sort of a yay or nay response, oh my god, this is going to be great, or vice versa, where am I going to put anything? So it's the designers who are more aware, that's better. So I don't feel threatened at all by that. We positively embrace a designer with a good eye for light as well, because there's more discussion to be had when that happens.
I think the only thing I find frustrating is when you're working with either a director or a choreographer who has their own vision so perfectly mapped out that all they want you to do is implement it, and there's no discussion and no collaboration. I would say they're, in my experience, pretty few and far between. And normally, if I've worked with them once, I don't tend to work with them again, either because they haven't enjoyed it or I haven't enjoyed it. But, you know, I think we seem to naturally drift towards the people that we get on with. And I absolutely feel that the lighting designer is still part of the team that I tend to make shows with.
I can see what you're saying. I had a meeting for the show that I'm taking to a couple of venues this summer before we first produced it at Stage at Leeds. It's the first time I'd met the director, and he said to me, "I want the lights to make this show look like it's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels." And I had to take a step back and say, let me read the script first. I'll make a few responses to it, and then we can have a discussion about what sort of colour palette I'll use and what sort of angles of light will work for the show. But it was that first thing. His first reference was cinema, so it's a completely different world and a completely different shape for lighting this show, which ended up in the round. So there is that sort of. There'll always be people that want to make their creative input in areas that they're not too sure about, but you can have a dialogue with them and you can make your points and take their points and work out a collaborative effort by the end of it.
So it seems to be about who you collaborate with, seems to be the answer to your question. I think we've got time for one more question from the floor.
Hi, I work for ETC, so obviously we're quite keen on LED products and tungsten and everything at the moment, but I was just wondering how, in the future in emerging technologies, how do you guys actually come across emerging technologies? Do you actively go out and look at the new LED products, the new pixel mapping on video effects, or do you just spot something that you see somewhere and think, oh, that's an idea, I'll look into that a bit deeper?
So how does the lighting designer come across new technologies?
I think I should probably be more active at looking and seeing what's out there. I try and sort of go along to as much as possible. I find these sort of environments, trade show environments, very artificial and very hard to actually. I mean, we're just sort of lead-tastic out there at the moment, and you become sort of blind to one thing over another, and actually it's the worst environment to do any form of sort of meaningful shootout between units. I'd love to see more roadshows where you can go, okay, this is our source 4 tungsten, this is our new source 4 with lead engine at the back of it, and go, this is what that can do, this is what this can do. I mean, I'm sure in a few years' time we're going to be seen as dinosaurs who put bits of plastic in front of vastly inefficient light sources which didn't even move. It's going to be our lot. We're going to be lumped in with some people who designed with gas. But no, I'd like to see the manufacturers approaching us more, actually. I mean, I know it's a two-way street, but actually to come up and go, we're going to design a new theatre unit. What do you want to see from it? And it's very quick. You can sort of see the adoption of certain products and how quickly they're adopted by the theatre industry as to how popular they are. Source 4 or TW1, it's where you go, well, that's a really good fit for us. And I'd like to see that development happen a bit earlier on in the process.
My point of contact is usually for the hire companies because, if I was designing a new Lloyd Webber musical, then I'm sure any hire company would buy in whatever piece of kit it is that I'm after. The reality is, the budgets I'm working with are, if I can get anything hired in, I'm quite lucky. So I normally just keep a dialogue open with them and say, what have you got that's new that you think I might be interested in? And every so often I'll go down and demo it. If I'm really lucky, I'll have a theatre space and I'll say, what have you got? I've got 3 days in a theatre. Can you send me one of anything I might not have played with? Because that way I can compare it with, with my known quantities. And I've been very lucky to do that from time to time. Demoing something in a workshop's really, really hard. I think for anyone that works in theatre, the key thing, and I'm talking about every fixture, not just LEDs, it's about how that bottom end dims away from barely perceptible to absolutely imperceptible. And there was a really great technology showcase at Hampstead Theatre that I went to a couple of years ago, and I know it happens quite regularly, I just haven't always been able to be there. And that was great because we saw kit in a dark theatre, well, darkish theatre environment, and we could look at stuff dimming down from a low glow down to nothing, and that's when you can judge, yes, this is up to it, or no, it's not, because nobody wants to get into that situation where you're sat in tech and the director goes, okay, let's just fade to black, and it just goes, ugh. And they go, is that the best we can do? And you go, I'm afraid we're using some new technology. I mean, that's just not ever going to be an acceptable situation, really. But I look forward to improvements. Yeah, no. I've heard you've got something out there that I should have a look at.
Fine. And I think, given that we've gone over our hour, I think we need to draw this session to conclusion. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and being such an attentive audience, and thank you for your questions. And could I ask you to give the panel a brief round of applause? Thank you very much.